Hello, and welcome back. This is Don't Watch at Night, a spooky little podcast dedicated to Spanish language horror and Latin American horror. I'm your host, Valerie.
And I'm Veronica.
And Veronica's getting all situated and set up.
Trying on shoes.
What was the jumping up and down for?
Trying on shoes.
Oh, okay. I was like, what are you doing? Shaking some wires loose?
No. All right, I'm done.
Okay. Well, we were just talking before getting going here. We were just talking about the woes of work and whatnot. But I see you have new shoes. You just showed them for like instruction purposes.
Yeah, because I needed just a pair of black sneakers, and because my old pair of black sneakers are like I'm wearing a hole in the. It's just time to trade them out.
Yeah,
they have no tread anymore on the floor. My feet would slide.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Did you get all your recording done last night?
Yes, thank God.
Okay, that's good.
Stressing me out. Like two short max 3-minute videos each, and it took me like almost an hour to do.
Recording oneself is a process. So, well, I don't really have anything to report on my end.
You just got back from a trip. What do you mean you don't have anything to report?
We took the kids. Spring break is wrapping up here in our neck of the woods here in Texas. We just brought the kids back from kind of El Paso area. We go out there. We do some rock climbing. We try to get out there like once a year if we can. So it was nice. They had a good time.
Found no dead bodies in the desert.
Found no dead bodies. Found no bones. It was very sad.
You know what sucks about this spring break this year is because like my 3 older kids that are in college, they all had their spring break last week. But my youngest, who's a freshman in high school, had his this week. So we would not have been able to.
That's take a trip anywhere. I forget he's a freshman in high school. How's it going? Loving it? Not loving it? Has he found his people?
He's never loved school, but he likes it better than
middle school. Middle school.
Like most places, at least in Texas, you do elementary, junior high, and then high school. Over here, they split it up where elementary is kinder through 4th, and then intermediate is 5th and 6th, and then I guess it's junior high is 7th and 8th, and then high school.
I mean, there's probably something that works out better for kids doing it that way, because I have always long believed that the distinction between 6th graders and 8th graders is vast. And what a nightmare throwing them all together in the same school. The 6th grade year is so traumatic. And it is, I know this because I remember my 6th grade year and I'm like going to be 43. So if I remember that trauma, then it's embedded. It's a traumatic experience.
As much as he can like school, he likes it better than his class.
He's found his people, his like little group of friends or people.
Yeah.
That's all that matters. So long as you
eats lunch with.
So long as you find your people, you have people you can survive these years with. That's what's important. This week, we watched El Orfanato, The Orphanage. This is a 2007 Spanish Gothic supernatural horror film directed by J.A. Bayona. And I think his name is Juan Antonio. Is that right?
I forgot to get my laptop, so I don't know.
Juan Antonio Bayona, I think is his name. Yeah, Juan Antonio. So, okay, where was I? Written by Sergio Sanchez with Guillermo del Toro acting as an executive producer on the film. It stars Belén Rueda as Laura, Fernando Cayo as Carlos, Roger Princep as Simón, Mabel Rivera as Pilar, Montserrat Carua as Benigna Escobedo, Geraldine Chaplin as Aurora, and Oscar Casas as Tomas. So I'm actually going to pull this directly from a Collider.com article that we have linked for you guys because it was such a well-written blurb. I was like, well, let's just go with this. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, spoilers ahead, but came out in 2007. You've been warned.
And possible trigger warning for someone unaliving themselves.
Right. That's true. The supernatural horror film tells the story of Laura and her husband Carlos, whose adoptive son Simón goes missing after they move into and begin renovating the orphanage in which Laura herself grew up. As the two desperately search for their son, Laura is seemingly haunted by ghostly children led by a boy in a disturbing burlap sack mask. Critics and audience alike found Bayona's dark and brooding debut equal parts unnerving and moving. So, Veronica, you just got through saying you watched this late last night. So did I. So give me your first initial impressions on this movie. What did you think of it?
I liked it. I will say, first of all, as usual, I had not even read a synopsis. I had seen no trailers. The only thing I had ever seen with regards to this movie was like still photos of the kid with the burlap sack mask. So I was expecting something different than what
Okay.
like something more disturbing than
Okay.
what we actually got. What we got was more of a kind of suspenseful, more of a ghost story than I would say
Yes.
like horror.
Uh-huh.
And when I say horror, I'm usually to me horror is Saw or something of that bit when there's a lot of like graphic
Right.
killing and violence and lots
Jump
of
scares
jump
and all this.
scares.
Yeah.
This is more subtle, a ghost story, but I liked it. I really liked it. It didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. So that was interesting. I always appreciate when a movie pivots and surprises me in that it takes a different path than the one I thought it was going to take. I think Belen Rueda, is that her name?
Yeah. She's a great actress.
She's a great actress. Like this is
in
what the
everything
third
she
movie,
does. Yeah, in
we've seen her
everything she
in.
does, she's fantastic.
So I'm a fan.
Yes.
And she's really the main linchpin of this movie. Like her husband and her son, and Simon, and her relationship with her son is kind of the central tent pole that holds the rest of the movie up. Her husband is there, but he's just kind of there. He's not
Right,
really
yeah.
active in the movie. So I enjoyed it. I was watching it in the living room with my headphones and on the laptop in the living room, and my husband had fallen asleep on the couch watching sports. And twice in the movie, I jumped and woke him up. The second time, he was fairly annoyed with me by that point. So I spent like the last 20 minutes watching the movie with my hand firmly clamped over my mouth so I wouldn't make any more noise.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin in that because I want to hear later. I want you to talk to me about where you thought this was going.
Okay.
So I'm going to remind me to ask you that later. So I watched this last night as well, and I can't even remember the last time I saw this movie. So just like olden times, the early days of our podcast here, I actually took a lot of notes as I was watching it, just because it's so interesting to watch it all these years later. Because I saw this movie when it first came out in theaters. It was one of like the don't come for
me.
me.
You saw it in the theaters.
I saw it in the theaters when it came out, only because I had a friend who, like, I wouldn't have necessarily gone to see this movie in theaters on of my own accord, because, and I still kind of am this way. I'm not real big on seeing scary movies in theaters because it's a very vulnerable place. I prefer to be terrified in my own home. So I remember being freaked out in the theater watching this movie. Yeah, it was just interesting to go back and watch it and see all these little things that I missed the first time around. It was comforting to see how well it holds up. It holds up to my impression of it way back when, which is that I loved it way back then. And so it was nice to see that it still holds up. I still love it. It's still a great movie. And I took like all these notes that don't even necessarily have anything to do with like the main 3 or so things I would pick to talk about today. But I'm interested to know, what were some standout things to you about it?
And I think this happened pretty early on, where we see that Simone is reading, or maybe his mom's reading it to him. I can't quite remember, even though I just saw it. But Peter Pan.
Yes.
And so that was pretty early foreshadowing, I thought. And it does kind of carry through the movie, this whole concept of lost boys that never grow up. And Wendy, who in the Peter Pan story, at least, once she gets older, can't make it to Neverland. And so that's kind of a theme that pulls through the whole movie.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done as well. Obviously the setting is gorgeous. I was reminded again last night, I was just like, man, I want to live in that house, even if it is massively haunted. I want to live in that house.
It'd be cool to even live in the lighthouse.
Yeah.
I have wanted to live in a lighthouse since The Fog. Who is that? Carpenter?
I think that's Carpenter, yeah.
Yeah. Carpenter's The Fog, like that 80s. I've always wanted to live in a lighthouse.
You're like, me too. Yeah, so just to give people some context of like how it opens. It opened, I don't know what the year is, but it opens where Laura
doesn't specify,
but bygone time, Laura as a child is playing 1, 2, 3 knock on the door, which is sort of like a red light, green light kind of game with other kids who live in this orphanage. That it is this house. You get the sense based off a phone call that one of the, what do they call them? Headmasters, governesses, teachers, whoever.
I don't know. The person in charge of the orphanage.
They're not nuns, right?
They weren't dressed as nuns.
I didn't see anybody dressed as a nun. Okay. These women who run this orphanage, they're on the phone with, you get the sense that Laura's about to go. She's maybe been adopted out. And so she's getting ready to leave all her friends. And that's kind of the opening of our movie. Where it picks up after that is she's now a grown woman who's returned with her husband and her son Simon, and they're moving back into this house, as I just said, with the idea that they're going to renovate it and kind of run it as a children's home again. Like you said, I like that there's a Peter Pan theme that is running throughout it that I don't necessarily remember picking up on the first time I saw it, even though it is more heavily referenced towards the end of the movie. Hold on. Sorry, guys. The last couple of times we've recorded have been in the morning, and I told Veronica I don't sound great first thing in the morning. So what was I saying?
Peter Pan, you didn't pick it up.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily pick up on the early references in the beginning of the movie the first time around. So it was interesting to kind of go back in and pick up on it this time around. There is a particular scene where when they're first there and they're having like contractors come, they're doing renovations, and the husband's at the piano playing a beautiful melody, and she comes and sits down with them, and they just have this beautiful moment together of playing some melody together that, even looking back on it now, even the ballad that they're playing is so beautiful and sad and kind of foreboding of like what is to become of their own love story, but I guess also of this family's story as well. The caves, when she takes her son Simon for a day at the beach and they go into that cave, I thought that was...
I'm like, ma'am, are you really going to let your young son walk into this big old cave all by himself?
This cave that obviously is just a recipe for disaster when high tide comes in. So were there any moments in setting up scenes that stood out to you? Or
well, Simone's reading Peter Pan, and I forget exactly what the line of conversation is, but basically his mom is telling him, well, I can't go to Neverland because he's asking her when she's going to die. And she says, well, what kind of a question is that? I'm not going to die until you're much, much, much older.
Yes.
And so he says, well, then I'll never grow up. I just won't grow up. The minute he said that, I was like, oh, God. He just sealed his fate. Like, that's it. This is going to end badly. I just know it.
Did you catch that the orphanage in the beginning, the orphanage that she's in as a little girl, it's called Good Shepherd Orphanage?
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if that was perhaps...
And all the kids seemed like really happy. So it wasn't... People, I think, have, at least in Hollywood, have this mental image of orphanages as just these bleak places where the kids are miserable and maybe they're mistreated. And they were playing. They seemed happy.
They seemed fed.
They seemed fed.
Clean, taken care of.
But yeah, I think the foreboding was... The tracks were laid down really early in the
They were
movie
laid down. We also pick up on the sense that Simon obviously has imaginary friends. There's two that he mentions in the beginning. That
somebody at Pepe, I don't remember the other one. But
some of the resources we looked at for this movie that kind of talk about creepy children. I mean, this is one of those movies where it's just like, it's got the thing that I think is on my list and is on your list as well. It's got creepy children to it, which is a... I don't want to say trigger, but a trope that I enjoy in scary movies.
I don't enjoy it, but but that's going to play into where this movie pivoted away from where I thought it was going to go.
When they're at the cave, Simone and his mom, and he seems to be talking to an imaginary friend that isn't there. And then on the way back, he's leaving the shells, a trail of shells.
I was like, no, kid.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Because, of course, at this point, you're expecting that there's a malevolent essence about this movie and about this place, and that maybe he's leading evil back to the house.
Right.
Somehow.
You don't know you don't know what it is. You don't know what the threat is.
Yes.
Oh, we also do learn in these moments Simone is sick. And so and I couldn't remember if the film details specifically what it is, but it does. We learn that he's got HIV, he's HIV positive. So he has to take daily medication. And that's yet another thing that sort of makes him extra vulnerable as a child, is just the fact that it's like he relies on there's a regimen of pills, just supremely vulnerable set of circumstances that Simone is in. What else? You got something? I wanted to ask you what you thought of the social worker.
Why is she there? I couldn't pinpoint, like, and one of the first questions that I would have asked if I'd been Laura was like, well, I'm sorry, who sent you?
Right.
Like, who sent you? And she never asks that.
And this is
Benigna,
who just looks supremely weird. Just a bizarre
big
lady.
Owl glasses, Coke
glasses. I saw a picture of this actress, like a lovely woman. They really made her look like a weirdo in this film, but she is a lovely lady. So,
but yeah, she shows up and I don't even remember the questions that she was asked. Like that was my question. Like, ask her the question, who sent you? Why are you here? And
Right.
Lana actually does say at one point, I don't understand why you're here. And she doesn't ever really give a good answer. So to Laura's credit, Laura says, okay, it's time for you to leave.
And we do
But
notice that she has on her jacket or her lapel, she's got like a little brooch that has these pictures of like these old timey pictures, and I don't know what you call them, little frames dangling
yeah,
from the brooch. So
I had wanted to like freeze it and who are those pictures? Because they definitely made a point of showing, like zeroing in on those pictures. Not enough for me to really see,
did you
and
get,
not long enough for me to see who it was.
I was going to say, did you get a sense of like who they were?
Mm-mm.
Like,
I mean,
okay.
family. I was thinking it must be family, but
Talking about the Peter Pan underlying current to this story, there is a podcast called Script Apart. Sergio Sanchez gave an interview with Script Apart, and that interview is published over on screencraft.org that we've got linked for you guys. He does say about that, he says, I thought it would be interesting to tell the story of Peter Pan from the point of view of the mother who's left alone while her kids go to Neverland. You see Simon reading Peter Pan at the beginning and asking why Wendy grew up, and we pick that up again later. In order to find out what happened to her child, she has to play like a kid again. There's something in Peter Pan, he says, that attracts me about the frontier. I liked this, about the frontier between adulthood and childhood, reality and fantasy.
I think that was genius because you like whoever has really thought about what the mother of Wendy and her brothers, like obviously by the time Wendy's older and Peter Pan's now taking her daughter to Neverland, which is kind of creepy, I think, if you really think about it. But anyway,
Yeah.
Wendy at least knows where they're going, but like her mother, when she was a girl, and her brothers, when they were taken to Neverland, I was like, what must the parents have been going through, not knowing where their children are?
Right. Yeah.
And so I like that he asked that question. It's like, well, what about the parents? What are they experiencing during this time that they have no idea where their children are? They just disappeared off the face of the earth.
Well, and it kind of, and this is a little bit, I think, I can see why Guillermo del Toro would have been drawn to this story and
Mm-hmm.
would have wanted to say, hi, this is something. Evidently, Del Toro followed Bayona as a student, like really was a fan of his work, and so when he got wind of this script and said, absolutely, I want to be part of this, and signed on to exec produce it, I can just see where this is got to be
Well,
something, the kind of story that he loves, because
yeah,
it's got that dark fairy tale quality to it. And I like the idea of taking a children's fairy tale and turning it into something not sinister, but creepy, just dark and creepy.
that quote you just gave about where that line between adulthood and childhood, and it reminds me of, was it a passage in the Bible? And I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember it exactly, but that thing that of when I was a child, I thought as a child, I acted as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Screw that. Why do we have to put away childish things? I say hold on to that inner child. Who says we have to give it up? What's that old Toys R Us jingle? I don't want to grow up.
I'm a
Toys R
Toys
Us
R Us
kid.
kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at this point in the movie, I do have it noted. We've been hearing, and chalk it up to old house, whatever. We're hearing creaks and groans and things of that nature. What were you making of all of that? Was that registering with you? Were you just sort of dismissing it as like, creepy aesthetics, creepy? That's kind of part of what this film does, is rather than have a bunch of jump scares and stuff like that, it
Or
builds
even
on,
visual scares.
yeah, it just builds on creepy atmosphere.
It,
And
like
so,
it really lets your imagination fill in what's making those noises. I mean, you're obviously, or at least I was
mhm.
thinking, okay, there's some supernatural mojo stuff going on
Something,
here or
yeah.
something. And so your mind is just kind of filling in, sort
Yeah.
of like in Jaws. Did you ever hear that story where they couldn't get the shark to work? So the
They
music, the Jaws theme really kind of plays in, and it's the
yeah.
audience
Well, and like
anticipating and
I
imagining.
do know, because Spielberg was not necessarily super satisfied with the look of the shark and things of that nature. Budgets being what they were, engineering being what it was, he had to sort of work with utilizing the audience's imagination and playing with music, playing with angles and things like that, so that you're never directly staring at the shark.
And I think that worked really well for that movie. And this movie was much the same because, like you said, there's not a lot of visual. Like you're not catching glimpses of the ghosts necessarily. You're not catching things in the background, so it's not even a visual thing. It's just all auditory.
Yeah.
And so your mind has no choice but to fill in the blanks.
And it's another one of those movies where it's just like it's dimly lit. Like I kept having to raise the resolution on my screen.
the game that Simon, when he's telling his mom, Laura, about the game that his imaginary friends, because he's got 6 of them now, he tells her he has 6 imaginary friends now, or 6 friends there that he plays with. And they have a game where it's kind of a treasure hunt. They steal your treasure and then they leave you clues to the next location. And then there's a clue to that and so on and so forth until you get your treasure back. Again, foreshadowing. I'm thinking, oh my God, what's her treasure? What is any mother's treasure, right?
Right. What is the thing that means the most to her? And
so again, I'm like, God, this kid's doomed.
As far as like Carlos, the husband, like you said, he's just kind of there. He's not a bad guy by any means, but not like central to the story in any way.
Well, we know that he's a doctor of some kind, and I'm sure he's busy with trying to get this. We're not shown what he's doing, but I'm assuming that they're trying to get this house ready and to be opened to accept children, and whatever kind of doctor he is, I'm sure he's busy with those professional aspects of what they hope to be their future. So he's there, and he seems loving to both her and their son. So like you said, not a bad guy. He's just not physically present a lot in the movie, and emotionally just elsewhere.
Even like the 2 times that she wakes up to noises,
I know.
He's like, it's my turn, I'll get up, and then doesn't get up. I'm like, dude.
I'm like, get his ass up.
The way I'd be like, Carlos, get up.
Well, and especially when she hears the noise.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to go and check on the kid because he's having a nightmare or whatever, but
like the noise that pulls her out to the shed, I'm like, no, you're getting up.
Get your ass out of bed right now.
And she goes to the old shed where she sees Benigna, this old lady, which to me, it struck me as a little bit funny when she comes out of hiding with her little shovel or whatever, and she's like creeping out of the shed, not running fast by any means because she can't, she's old. And this random woman.
And that's a question I have. So why do you think she was there?
I feel like because of what we come to learn later, I feel like I can't imagine she'd be going to try to move remains.
That's what I thought, and that's probably is why she was there. She went there to remove them, and so that they don't get found.
But that's a lot to remove. Like as we'll see later, it's a lot.
And why was she just assuming that no one would have? Because Laura is now 37. She was probably about Simon's age when she under 10, but no more than 10. When she left. Why is she just now thinking that, someone might find these remains of the other orphans? What was her thought about those things?
And like refresh my
all
memory.
The intervening years.
Later on in the movie, when Laura is there and she discovers that it's remains, apart from like the clues, the pieces that tell her that these are the remains of her friends, does she find a clue for her that's part of the game she's in at that point with them? Does she find a clue there?
No.
Okay, because I was going to say, does Benigna plant that? Benigna, she's a red herring, honestly, is what she is. Yes. Because you believe that she's somehow involved in this. And I mean, she is from a standpoint of like she did something terrible.
In the past, yes.
Yes.
But not currently.
Right.
No, because she goes to the shed because she's looking for where that doorknob, which is the last clue, she's looking for where it goes. And
where it could be.
When she's looking in there, she happens to see those little doors leading that are locked. And so she just busts her way in there, but she doesn't actually find a clue.
Tell me where I have another moment that I want to talk about, but it comes up later. So talk to me about where this movie shifted for you and went in a different direction than what you were expecting. Is there anything you want to say before you do that? Is there anything you want to say about the party scene? And
I'm like, why are people wearing all these funky
creepy masks, paper mache, creepy masks at an event that's supposed to be geared towards children that are coming to be part of this, who also have special needs and health situations. So it's just like, why would you have these creepy ass masks at this party?
I know, it's
whatevs.
Disturbing. Something that will kind of set up the ending of the movie for us. When this party is starting, Lara goes up to Simon's room to say, hey, come down. It's time to come down. And he refuses to go down. He wants to show her his friend Tomas, who's the only one of his 6 friends, imaginary quote unquote friends, whose name we know at this point. Let me come show you Tomas's little house. And of course, Laura's like, no, we
don't have time for this.
Downstairs. Right. We got to go meet people, greet people. And then he gets mad and he throws in her face that she's not his real mom and that
Mhm.
he's dying and blah, blah, blah. Or maybe that is where he said something about him dying.
Yeah. Well, he's learned in a very short amount of time that one, he's adopted, he didn't know, and that he's sick. So
Right.
like, yeah,
Which are two things that Carlos and Laura had not yet shared with him.
the full details of, yeah.
She's like, fine, stay up here. You don't have to come down. And she goes off to the party. So that kind of will set up the end of the movie that we'll get to in a minute. But where this movie pivoted for me, from the very beginning, everything the audience gets in terms of our perceptions of the movie, of what's happening once Simon goes missing, is all fed to us from Laura's point of view. Her fears, her, I don't know if I would call it paranoia, but just her sense that there's something in this house or a presence in this house that took her son. Because she sees Tomas. She sees Tomas appears to her wearing his
At the party, right?
freaky burlesque mask.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
And locks her in the bathroom.
Right.
So she's seen him. So that to her is the boogeyman. This is the central figure that is responsible for Simon's disappearance. That's what I was going with. I was going along with that. Once we later learn that Benigna used to work at when she was much younger, she used to work at the orphanage and had a son with a disfigured face that she kept covered in that burlap sack. And again, here I'm like, okay, but why would you pick why would you decorate the burlap sack that way? It's creepy as hell.
Like that? Set
Paint
this child
something
up
pleasant.
for success, please.
Paint something, positive or happy. But no, anyway, so we find out that he drowned out of a result of just a childish prank.
They were playing
the other orphans played. It wasn't malicious. It was just a tragic thing. So I'm thinking, this is like Friday the 13th. This mother is crazed because she blames other people for the drowning death of her son. And so this is a revenge thing, right?
Right, yeah.
And this plays right into what you said about Benigna being a red herring. So I'm thinking this is kind of a revenge plot. And then when it becomes obvious that, okay, Benigna's not, because
she gets plowed over with a bus.
That was the first time I jumped and screamed, was when the bus hits her out of nowhere. Then I'm thinking, okay, well, it's Tomas's spirit that's seeking revenge. Even though I'm asking myself, but then why is he picking on Laura? She wasn't even there. Yeah, right. She wasn't even there when this happened. So, but that's where I was thinking that it was some kind of revenge and malevolent. Tomas is this malevolent entity that's hasn't moved on, and he's just kind of causing tragedy in the real world. And then it shifted, and it became the cause of Simon's disappearance was tragic. It was going to be tragic either way, but it was a more mundane, normal, everyday life. Yeah. Yes, there are ghosts, but the ghosts had nothing to do with his.
Yeah, right.
So that I appreciated that I was going with Laura. I was like following her. She was leaving us the seashells, leading the trail to what she thought was going on. And we, along with the audience, discover that's pretty much the same time she does. Is it? No, that's not it at all.
That's not it at all.
Shift our perspective completely.
In between her coming to that realization and Simone going missing, all that stuff, we do have this fun little sequence that you could almost say feels random, but it's not. It's central to sort of understanding what's there prior to the poltergeist-esque scene with the medium coming to the home.
At least there was no meat with maggots in it.
Right. The medium coming to the home, Aurora, who looks just like peak quintessential creepy. I aspire to that level of weirdness, but it almost feels like a separate standalone scene, except that is how we learn what happened to these children. Mm-hmm. We kind of put together that following the tragic drowning of Tomas, Benigna, in a crazed rage, poisons these children or makes them ill. And then once they die off, they're burned essentially in what are those, incinerators? What are those? Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the ashes that Laura finds later, is the ashes of these children. So we know that they were poisoned or made sick somehow. And then once they died, that's what became of them.
What were all the other orphanage workers doing?
Right? Right?
She burned she cremated all these kids, and like, how do they not? I mean, they may have asked, but it's not shown, it's not referenced. But I'm in those questions of like, where were you people? Like, what happened?
Unless that's just what they did with everyone who died, was just like you were cremated, and maybe, but still, it's like all of these children die.
But then they didn't even bury the ashes. They didn't even bury the ashes. They just
left them there.
what is
I
it?
don't know.
An incinerator?
Maybe following that tragedy, the orphanage shut down and remained closed until Laura comes back. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
But it was disturbing when the medium Aurora is up in the room and she opens the door to the one room where all the orphans' beds were, their bedroom, and you could just hear them, wailing and crying and screaming because I'm sure you're poisoned. It's painful. So that was
Reminds me
just
of
sad.
The Sixth Sense, the girl
Her
whose mother
mom
was making her sick. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so that was a sad scene with those poor orphans.
So it was for that reason alone. We needed to understand what happened to those children in order for the rest of the pieces to come into place for the second half of the movie. Carlos is hitting his limit in terms of what, because at this point it's also, I forgot
It's been
that
like 9 months.
there's a time jump.
Yeah.
So yeah, because
First
like
he's been gone 6 months, and then it's 9 months.
and then it's 9 months, so almost a year. And so at this point, because we know that Simone needed daily medication in order to survive, were you still holding out any kind of hope that he would be alive, or you knew that this was going to be a recovery
No, I was
situation?
like, there's no way this kid, even if he hadn't had the illness, had HIV, I was like, I just don't see how this kid's going to be alive, because where would he have been all this time?
Yeah.
Because really, by the time the movie ends, it is probably closer to the 12-month mark. So I'm just like, I just didn't see. And at one point I checked the time and there was like 19, 20 minutes left. And this is when she's kind of starting to recreate the past. She dresses up in the outfit and she puts all the new kids' beds that they were going to use for the new business, and she puts in their old beds in there.
She single-handedly builds 6 beds, or 5 or 6 beds.
And I'm just thinking, this is not good. I just did not see how they could possibly end well in 19 minutes. And that's where we were in the plot.
Yeah. I mean, because that's the thing is, it's like when Simone first goes missing, in her frenzied run trying to find him and locate him, she runs out to the cave where she thinks he must have gone, and maybe he hid there. And she sees someone. Tomas is what it certainly looks to be. She like breaks her ankle or something, right? She does something. So I mean, I forgot that like the time jump between her being in the wheelchair and a cast and then her 9 months later she is walking again. She is decently enough healed. But I can't remember the first time I saw this movie if I thought that there was any hope for him. I do remember just being aware that the medication issue would be the key thing, unless he was taken by people who were continuing to keep him medicated. But like you said, once Benigna, I don't feel like I'm saying that name right, but once she gets plowed over by a bus, you just don't know, unless she's part of the kidnapping with other people, and you don't know. What did you think of, so in that sequence where Carlos has left, and like you said, Laura has figured out that she's going to have to play the game. She's going to have to recreate the scene, the environment that these children lived in. She washes up the old linens. She puts together the old beds. She even like dresses herself as one of the school governesses. She goes and picks berries to feed them a picnic feast at the table. What did you think of all of that? I did notice this on this viewing that as she's doing all of this, because it's a mountain of labor.
Yeah,
she's fatigued, and I
think she probably was not eating. Like, I don't think we ever saw her eating at all in this whole movie.
But on watching it this time around, I was wondering, because remember how the medium tells her, Laura, that those of us who are close to death can sometimes, our connection to that spiritual world is sometimes a little bit stronger. And she's referencing her own evidence on her arm that she is sick and terminal. Simone also was sick. Thinking of that in my brain on this viewing, I was wondering if maybe those instances where we see Laura slowing down wasn't just fatigue. Like, I was beginning to wonder if her body was slowly starting to give out on her a little bit. And maybe she was also close to death. I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know. I think she was just tired. I did try to look, like when Aurora showing her arm and saying that line about those of us who are close to death, or I guess are more sensitive to the other side. I was trying to look, because her forearm is right next to Laura's forearm, and I was trying to see, was she saying that because maybe were there marks on her? Did you see any marks on Laura's arm that would have indicated that maybe at one point she tried to cut her wrists? Or
I didn't see anything that stood out to me too much, because I was too busy looking at Aurora's arm, which was all marked and So yeah, I didn't notice. But yeah, I was just hyper aware this time around of how all of this is taking its toll on Laura physically. That's reflective of any number of things. You're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're not hydrating, you're becoming
Yes.
more and more desperate. So let me talk to you about after all this time, my scariest scene in this whole movie is the scene where Laura, the adult, is having to play 1, 2, 3, knock on the door with these ghost children. And I was just
Well,
like,
that's when I was sitting there with my mouth because
I
I
was
was
just like,
thinking,
nope, 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 nope.
I can't jump again. My husband will
She's like,
not have
1,
it.
2, 3, knock on the door. And then she turned it was so well shot, and the tension
Mhm.
is so terrifying.
You're still thinking that these kids, Tomas, they're the evil,
Right.
or the bad thing that's going on. They're behind it. So you're still
Creepy
very
ass
much in that.
children. And there's nothing creepier than having to play essentially hide and seek with creepy ass children.
And to
So,
turn your back on them while you're
right?
doing the knock, knock, knock part.
I've been
Um,
like, no, I don't know that I would be brave enough to do that.
that's the point in that game that she's playing with them, that one of the kids goes to hide in that closet under the stairs, and that's what leads Laura to that closet. And then the door shuts on her in there, and again you're thinking, oh, they're locking her in and this is bad.
They're going to hurt her. Yeah.
She realizes that that doorknob, that last clue that she had, fits a hidden door in the wall, and she opens it. Old stairs leading down into complete and utter darkness, and again we're thinking, oh my god, this is going to be bad. My hand was clamped in front of my mouth so I wouldn't make any noise. She goes down. She sees that that's where they kept Tomas hidden away from the other children. His drawings are still up on the
Yeah.
wall. She finds Simon alive and
What did you
sleeping. And
think in that moment where you're like, no way?
yes, I was like, but there's supernatural things obviously going on in the movie. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe
Maybe so.
maybe they were sneaking him his meds. I don't know. But for like a whole year, 9 months to a year, he's been down there. But so she's talking to him and telling him, remember the times when it was before we moved here, when it was just you, me, and dad, and close your eyes, keep your eyes closed, and you're hearing the noises of the kids upstairs. It's loud, and it was a tense scene. And what were your thoughts?
I don't remember what I first thought.
I can only imagine what this was like watching it in a big theater. Like, it
Well,
was
I
bad
mean,
enough watching it on my laptop.
this is what I'm telling you. That knock on the door game scared the crap out of me. But I think I so desperately wanted to believe that Simone was going to be found, and so like, even though logically it doesn't make sense, like you said, that he would have lasted 9 months, I still like wanted to believe somehow this was real. And so as the noise is building and it's intensifying, and she's begging him, please make them go away, make them go away. Once she opens her eyes and we see that the room is not as she envisioned it, she's back in darkness. The blanket is empty. The
Mm-hmm.
red blanket that Simone was wrapped in is empty, and it falls to the ground. Then the sad realization of what we were about to find hit. I do remember the first time I watched it just being so hit by that moment, because prior to that I really wanted to believe. And so then once you see it was all in her mind, I was just like, oh god. And
And then it
then
gets worse.
it gets worse because then she looks up and she notices a break in the banister railing on the stairs, or
Mhm.
the stair railing. She sees a body there on the floor, and it all like starts coming together for her.
Clicking in her mind.
The noises that she'd been hearing had been him banging at the door trying to get out, because when she put the poles and stuff back in the closet, she inadvertently put the poles against the door, blocking him from getting out. The banging, the loud crash was him falling to his death there. And so she realizes, she goes and she takes off the mask and she sees that it's Simon, his body. And it's just like, it was just devastating. It was like
Yes.
devastating all over again. I was just like, oh,
Yes, that was just heartbreaking. Number
She-
one, that it happened. And number two, especially for her, knowing that she inadvertently caused that.
Right.
Like, I can't even imagine
Yeah.
what that would feel like.
And so then she got like, and I had remembered this line. And so like the first time we see Simone in this movie, that line played in my brain. I made a note of it. And then in this particular sequence, when she pulls his body out and she carries him back to like what had been the kids' room, she says something like, but this isn't fair. I found you, just like, but I found you. This isn't fair. And so, this is the trigger warning. part where she's just like in her grief, she's just popping pills, just swallowing an entire bottle's worth of pills, holding him.
She just kind of slumps, like she falls asleep, loses consciousness, and then suddenly you see a light, and she seems to wake up and revive, and she sees the lighthouse that in modern day was not working anymore, but it's working. The light is flashing. She looks down and she sees her younger self look at her and then turn and run.
That's right. Yeah.
Run across the lawn. The beds are full of...
Well, she sets down Simone, who is now miraculously alive again. But it's something to the effect of like, will you stay here? Will you take care of all of us?
Yes.
And then you see that, yes, all of the children are in their beds.
Tomas is there.
Yeah.
And he leads one of her friends. One of the other friend girls was blind. And so he leads her up, and the little blind girl is touching Laura's face, and she turns and she announces to the other kids, it's her. It's Laura.
It's Laura. And that part felt very Lost Boys, Peter Pan-esque, almost straight out of the movie Hook. What did you think of all of that?
I thought that was a very bittersweet ending. Although I will say, and I have to say, as someone who has worked in the mental health field for many, many, many years, not currently, but in the past, not really a fan ever, not just of this movie, but in any movie that ever kind of romanticizes suicide. I do have a quibble with that, but it is a bittersweet, because she had even told Carlos earlier in the movie when he had kind of reached his limit, and he was like, we can't live here. I don't want to live here anymore. We have to get away. And I just want to be with Simone. And I was like, okay, that's not going to end well either. So I'm not surprised she did what she did. And I thought that was going to be the last scene of the movie. So I was kind of surprised when it wasn't. Of her. She's holding Simone in her lap. The other kids are gathered around her, and her and Simone had always had this thing where he would give her like 3 prompts to a story, and she would make up a story using those 3 words, and he gives her the 3 prompts again. And so she sets out to tell them all the story, and that's going to be her role for them in the afterlife, or whatever part of the afterlife they're occupying.
And then from there, it transitions to some time has passed. We see that there's a headstone there in the yard, memorializing
all of them.
Laura, Simone, and the names of the children. Guillermo,
Tomas,
Martin, Victor, other people. I don't know all the names off the top of my head. And it's just Carlos. It's just the husband laying flowers at the headstone, and sort of you understand what has happened. And then this ending scene I wanted to ask you about, because I'd completely forgotten about it as well. I had forgotten everything past that scene of her with the children. This scene where he goes up to the old children's room, and he's looking out the window, and then as he's leaving, he uncovers the necklace that had been his, that he gave to Laura. He was some sort of religious pendant that he wanted her to have, because he didn't believe, but she did, and he's like, so long as it's with you, then there's hope and you'll be safe, and et cetera, et cetera. So he sees it there, because that was one of the last things she did as she was losing consciousness, was she had ripped it from her neck. He picks it up, and then you hear the doors creak open, the doors to the children's room creak open, camera shot of the doors opening, and you see him, and he looks up, and we don't see what he sees, but he smiles, and that's the end. And so I wanted to ask you about that, because it's it's an ambiguous ending kind of. And so I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that.
I think because there was a scene in the movie when her and Carlos are some kind of like grief support group or something for parents. And there's another mother that says about a year after her daughter died, she walked into her daughter's bedroom and she saw her daughter there. And she took it as a sign that her daughter was telling her, I'm okay, I'm safe, giving her not permission, but so that she doesn't carry that burden of grief as much maybe anymore. I don't think you could ever totally be free of it, but it gave her that mama sense of peace, knowing that she's okay. I think this was in that same vein, because we know that if the spirits want, because Tomas appeared to Belen appeared to Laura before locking her in the bathroom, they can do it. They can make themselves visible, and then of course the kids later on. So I think maybe her and Tomas made themselves visible to Carlos, and so it was just their way of letting him know that we're okay, we're together. I found him, I'm with him. You can
I
go and live your life and not
that
worry
isn't
about us.
that is a lovely ending. There was a part of me when I
Don't
watched it, it
crush
was
it,
like,
Valerie.
well, no, there was just a part of me that's like, he's gonna go and join them now.
Well, maybe, who knows? But
I think your ending is probably more what it is than it's
what did
just.
you initially make of it? Or
I
did
mean, I
you?
remember thinking, I was just like, he's gonna go and join them in the afterlife now. That's what's gonna happen, and then there's gonna be a family together haunting the moors of this Spanish castle, whatever.
Mhm.
But no, I like your ending better. Your ending makes more sense.
Well, I didn't preclude that he does that. I just I didn't take it that far
Right.
down the road.
Yeah.
What did you make of when she sees that version, that younger version of herself out on the lawn of the that she runs off? What did you make of that?
I honestly only picked up on it this time around. I don't even know that I paid attention to it the first time I saw it, but I did clock that as like, this is afterlife that we're
Mm.
dealing with now. So I sort of looked at it as like,
I thought about it for a lot because I
it's
didn't know what
death. It's death is what it is.
I didn't know what to make of it at first, and it didn't even really hit me till like earlier in this podcast. I think you said something that might have triggered this thought. But now, the way I'm going to choose to view that scene or what that symbolizes is because that's after she's taken the pills and she's kind of, and I think of it not as an immediate death. I think of it more as a she fell asleep and her heart is like slowing.
Slowing.
So when she sees her younger self and her younger self runs off, now I'm going to interpret that as that's the moment that her life force left her body. So
Yeah,
that's really when she
that's
passed.
death. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how we know she's crossed over, is
Hmm.
what's happened to Never Land.
Yep. Wendy did get to go after all.
I wanted to mention this because if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, this film has a high scoring. I think certainly in the years that since it first came out, it is really beloved by audiences and critics alike, with a couple of exceptions. It is kind of interesting to look at some of the reviews. And like I said, by and large, really, really positive. But you do get those occasional remarks from somebody saying something like, "Well, this isn't horror." I think that depends a little bit on like what your perceptions of horror are, and maybe what kind of limitations you may or may not put around it. I think it's as Bayona has said in interviews, I think it's a ghost story.
Hmm.
And so I was taking a look at like what other movies in the horror genre came out around 2007.
Well,
So
and I
you
think
had,
there's different degrees of horror. There's different, because like the others, right? Which this is kind of reminiscent of.
which came out well before this movie did.
Yeah.
But in 2007 we had Trick or Treat. We had the first Paranormal Activity. 28 weeks later, I mean, these were all like solidly horror movies. And then you have this movie that comes out, and I think even though we had the others, we had other horror mysteries out there, What Lies Beneath, those movies did exist, but I think this movie kind of came out in a year where there was just lots of traditional horror coming out.
Hmm.
And so some audiences just didn't know what to make of this, particularly because like in a couple of interviews, Bayona and the filmmakers said that they kind of came up against a little bit of pushback in festival audiences with people not really knowing what to make of the ambiguous ending. And how do you interpret that? But I
Well, I
mean,
like what he said. I think it was him, Bayona, that said it in one of the articles you've listed in show notes, that for this movie, the real Benigna did the horrible thing that she did in the past, poisoning all the orphans, but she's just a red herring to the current goings on in the movie. So the real, what did he say? Fear is the villain in this movie. It's not Tomas. We go through practically the entire movie thinking Tomas, and again, it's his mom's fault for giving him that creepy mask, but to wear. But we go through this whole movie thinking he's the evil, or he represents the evil that's going on, and then it turns out to be it was just a mundane, tragic, horrible accident that happened that was not intended by anybody, least of all Laura. But her fear, just fear in general,
yeah.
was the villain of the movie.
Oh, wait. Let me go find it because, and I meant to look this up, Ron, and have it ready to go. And I didn't, but you might remember because again, Del Toro's hand in things during the poltergeist-esque scene with Aurora the medium,
Mm-hmm.
they're talking. Somebody asked a question. It might be the professor guy asked, "Well, what is a ghost?" And I made a note of like that feels like a callback to The Devil's Backbone, because how did that movie start with a quote about like what is a
Do I remember the quote? No,
But
no.
what is a ghost? At one point in this movie, they make reference to an echo, and I kind of felt like that was another gentle callback to The Devil's Backbone as well. Because I made a note of it. I was like, that feels again like we're playing with those notions of what is death? What is the supernatural world? In this movie, we're made to believe that it's something sinister and evil, when in reality, like you said, the real villain is imaginings going on in her mind.
Okay, so the character Casares, who's the orphanage doctor,
In The Devil's Backbone. Yeah.
defines a ghost as a tragedy condemned to repeat itself time and again, an instant of pain, something dead which still seems to be alive, an emotion suspended in time like a blurred photograph, like an insect trapped in amber.
Here we are again, once again, questioning what is it? What does it truly mean to be haunted? Yeah.
And one of the other art reviews that are referenced in the show notes makes mention of, because one of the things I enjoy in movies in general, not just doesn't have to be a horror movie, is setting as a character in and of itself. So one of the reviews mentioned how this movie did a good job of using that theme of, how do they phrase it? Abandoned places and the spectral presences left behind.
Mm. In one of the interviews that Bayona gave, he talked about this is what the article says, in the wake of the repressive Franco regime, and that's for listeners, that's General Francisco Franco, who ruled from 1939 to 1975. Ghost stories became a way of speaking metaphorically about what happened in Spain. And Bayona says, a ghost story doesn't have to be a horror story. That's the lesson I learned as a kid watching Spanish movies about the Franco regime. They deal with ghosts, with loss. Ghosts as something psychological, not related to visual effects. Everything in this script happens in the mind of Laura. And so, I like that. I like, as I think you know, I like ghosts and haunted stories like this one as a way of grief processing. I like that a lot. I like ghost stories. Ghost stories were kind of my gateway entry into horror, the broader world of horror. So haunted stuff, paranormal stuff. Some of my favorite Unsolved Mysteries episodes growing up in the 80s were the haunted ones.
So, Valerie, in 1 to 5 light switches, how many light switches do you think someone should have on to watch this movie?
I think if you've never seen this movie before, if it's your first time watching it, I don't think you want to watch this completely in the dark. I think it will. I think it will scare. It's scary. Creepy ass kids are scary.
But they weren't creepy kids, as we find out.
They're not going into it blind, not knowing anything about it, you're going to be kind of creeped out. So I would say at least 2 switches.
I would say 2-3 switches.
Yeah.
Switches you should have them on.
Once you know, then I think you can just appreciate the film for what it is. But yeah, the first time you watch it, you need to be like, at one point, I remember the first time Alex saw this movie when we first started dating. I had him watch this movie.
How did you get him to watch it? He doesn't like scary movies.
Well, because we were newly dating and he would do things to make me happy. Right.
That's ship sailed.
So we were over at his apartment and it was me, him, his brother, and his brother's wife. And we were all sitting around the living room watching it. And his brother, equally as much of a wimp about scary movies. And so at one point, I think it's the scene where she's having to play knock on the door with the creepy children. I look over and his brother just has a sheet over his head, just like completely covering his head. But yeah, it's a good movie. It's a good movie. I'm glad you like just this morning, I was just like, what if she doesn't like it? What am I going to do?
No. I have to make my husband watch this one and The Devil's Backbone.
I'm surprised he hasn't seen this one.
He was going to watch it with me, he said, but then it got late and he has a tendency to fall asleep on the couch. So he didn't. He wouldn't have made it through.
Have any of your kids watched this one?
No. The only one of my kids, like my oldest, doesn't like scary movies at all.
Yeah.
The only one that likes or that has watched scary movies is daughter number 2.
I can see that. She's creepy. I say with love. She's one after my own heart, so I get it.
She is. Now, even though these did not end up being creepy children, they're just all victims of tragedy. Creepy children is something that I find disturbing in horror movies where you actually do have creepy children, like Damien and that movie. What was that movie with a young Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood, The Good Son?
The Good Son, yeah.
Yes. One of the quotes, it may have been Bayona that said it, I don't know. He says, in referencing creepy children, and why we are afraid of children, our fear of children. We are afraid of their vulnerability, which is our vulnerability, and the mysterious otherness of their private mental worlds. Which again is why I say, why do we have to give up our childish things? Hold on to your childish things, people.
Again, we've linked this all for you guys to read up on afterwards. If you go to our website and you go to our episode blog, that's where all of our resources are for every single episode. So I think it's that same article that closes with this line that I really liked. What makes you jump doesn't linger. It's the humanity of the thing that went bump in the night that makes you shudder for a long while after.
Very good movie.
Dare I ask, have you watched anything fun? No. Hey, I watched, okay, so our mom texted us last night. I think she's already made it through all of The Residents. I just watched the first 2 episodes last night. It's fun. Once you have time and you want to just do something light and whatever, go watch The Residents. It's fun.
I've seen it come across a lot of my... One show that I had started watching before my life just got swallowed up by this other thing in my life that's currently occupying like literally every waking moment is a comedy. What's it called? St. David's? Hold on. Let me look at it.
I haven't heard of either. Like, neither of those sound familiar to me.
Yeah, St. Dennis Medical. It's what it's called. So it's a sitcom set in a medical setting, and it's done in that mockumentary style.
think you told me about this. Yeah.
But it's funny. Kind of like Abbott Elementary, which is also another funny show. I will get back to you once I'm past this stuff in real life.
You would like The Residents. It's maybe not like ha 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 all the time, and
that was Andre Braugher's last role before his untimely passing.
Oh, and then the other guy filled his role. Is that it? Giancarlo Esposito.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Andre Braugher he would have been great. He would have been excellent in that role. I can totally see that.
He was funny. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, what was it? Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
Brooklyn Nine-Nine, yeah.
Also a funny show.
We've got one more movie episode in April and then book club. So finish those books. Veronica, start that book.
Start it. In my case. Even
Fever
buy
Dream.
it. I don't even have it. I gotta see
Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin. Again, if you go to our website, don'twatchatnight.com, we've got book club information there. So read it. Be part of that discussion with us. Ron, is there anything else?
Not for me.
We will be posting on social media what the upcoming movie is for beginning of April episode. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Don't Watch at Night is a Nest production hosted by me, Veronica, and Valerie. Editing by Valerie. Music by Omar Chakor. Production support for this episode provided by Lorenzo Villarreal and Alex Street. Listen to new episodes of Don't Watch at Night every other Monday, and don't forget to give us a rate and review. It's the best way to help us grow.